Can you all hear me? Yes. Thank you. So, as Jonathan so kindly introduced me, I'm Katherine Goldstein. I'm the creator and host of the Double Shift podcast, which is a show about a new generation of working mothers that brings reporting and storytelling and journalism to that topic. So I want to thank our sponsors and events. Special shout out to Eastern Bake Shop, which is owned by a mother, so always like to support mom-owned businesses. Any working moms here? A few? Oh yeah, my people. Okay, so today's theme, of course, is wonder. And we will get back to both the double shift and wonder. But I want to back up and set the scene for my own story that I want to tell today. Because, of course, being creative is such an important part of storytelling, and sort of my creative medium that I'll share with you today is storytelling. So, to set the scene, this is early 2015, and I've climbed the ladder in my career. I'm a successful New York City professional. Throughout my 20s and early 30s, I was all in on Lean In, which is Sheryl Sandberg's Bible of corporate feminism, which is basically the idea that if you really charge ahead and you don't hold yourself back as a woman, nothing will stop you. So I really internalized this message and really believed that if I just kept pushing forward in my career, I would continue to soar. And so here I am soaring. I am taking a picture. I had a fancy magazine job where I was Instagramming the sunset from the New World Trade Center, where my office was, overlooking the Statue of Liberty, taking pictures of the sunset. And I'm wearing my fancy designer dress, and I have a high-powered, high-paying job, and I feel like nothing can stop me. So what you can't tell about this picture is that I'm about 10 weeks pregnant, and my life is going to dramatically change over the course of the next year. So the theme of today is wonder. So this is a great theme for the talk I want to give, because I think there's no greater sense of wonder than becoming a parent. Because, and I experienced wonder in a whole new way on July 15th, 2015, when Asher Michael Morrison was born, and it was Bastille Day, a day of revolution. And what is so amazing about the experience of becoming a parent is it opens you to a range of emotions that you didn't know existed. And the best way I can describe it is that the world goes technicolor. And then you realize the uniqueness of this feeling. Billions of other people have felt this too. And that so powerfully connects you to humanity in a way that you didn't even know was possible. So to me, the idea of becoming a parent is so interconnected to the idea of wonder. So also, wonder, of course, as a journalist, has another meaning. It is to wonder. It is to ask questions. So I feel as a journalist, my highest calling is to ask questions that challenge the status quo. That's what I'm here to do. And so to wonder is to ask why things are the way they are, and to not make assumptions, and to explore things that nobody's thought to look into. So, despite all the wonder that comes with being a new parent, this is and all the joys and challenges and the sleeplessness, this is a family photo of my son as a newborn, and that's my husband Travis, who's here, which is very exciting, because usually we're in different cities whenever I give talks, so it's very exciting he's getting here to speak today. So despite all of the challenges that come, all the regular challenges that come with being a new parent and figuring out how to take care of a newborn and the sleeplessness and the anxiety, we had an additional challenge, which was when my son was 6 weeks old, we went for what we thought was a very routine follow-up appointment because of something picked up on a prenatal sonogram. And it turned out he had some pretty serious problems with his kidneys and he needed surgery right away. So and then it required additional hospitalization, all when he was a newborn and during my maternity leave. So I was pretty traumatized, honestly, by this experience. It was a really tough personal experience and entrance into motherhood. And although you can tell from, I was pretty traumatized. As you can tell from this photo of him in the hospital, he did not appear to be traumatized, and he is a very healthy, happy 4-year-old now. But it was a very rough start into finding my balance as a mother and a person and sort of processing everything that happened. But I was back at my desk when my maternity leave was up. And I didn't consider asking for more time because I was so worried about letting people down. And I was so concerned about what people would think about me as a professional and career if I needed more time to sort of adjust to my new reality. But my career was really important to me. And despite how important my career was to me, I was still just not ready to go back to work. Maternity leaves in this country, or even generous maternity leaves, are much, much too short according to all research, World Health Organization studies. Every bit of data says maternity leaves in this country should be much longer. But I was back at my desk, the day the scheduled maternity leave was up, and my head was so out of the game that I couldn't remember my awful subway stop the first day back at work. So, just as my beginnings in motherhood were rocky, my return to work did not go well. And that is a long story for another day. But when I see this photo, I think you all see a very happy, smiling family. This is the first snow of the winter. We're sitting out on our stoop, our brownstone in Brooklyn, enjoying baby's first snow, and we look for sort of the epitome of a perfectly happy family. And when I see this photo, I remember that this was really a low point in my life. So shortly before this, I had lost my job, and I felt like I had totally lost my sense of identity. If I didn't have a job and I wasn't this high-powered professional, then who was I? And so whenever I see this picture, I'm reminded of that moment. I had this 6-month-old, I didn't have a job, and I didn't know what would be next for me. So this was a time in my life where I really felt like a total failure. I was sure that everybody had this working mom thing totally figured out except for me. Everybody had it all down, and I was just personally defective, and that there was something wrong with me. So, then I started to wonder. I started to wonder a little bit if it really was that I was personally defective. And it definitely took me a while to regroup and think about what was next for me professionally, but ultimately, over the course of a couple of months and years, I started to turn my journalistic wondering, questioning mind towards the experience of being a working mother. What were the questions that were not being asked about this? So I started to look into some of the complex issues working mothers face that involve public policy, workplace policies, healthcare, gender roles, and as you can see from this graph, economics. So here's an interesting graph about earnings, as you can see on the axis, the earnings between men and women with kids. So things are like kind of going along around the same amount of earnings, and everything is going swimmingly until what happens? Birth of the first child. What happens to the women's earnings? They plummet. So what is happening here in this moment and the way this graph diverges? There are so many stories and so much to uncover and unpack in what is happening there. So, because who has money tells many, many stories about who has power. If you do not have money in this country, you do not have power. So here's another way of thinking about it. So, quick biology lesson, 25 to 35 is biologically like a pretty good time to have a baby. This is like prime time. And this is a lot of the window where a lot of women choose to want to start a family. So if you choose to make this very normal life choice of wanting to have a baby during this time, your earnings never recover. So relative to your male partners. So basically, if you choose to have a baby during this time in America, you are subjecting yourself to a lifetime of economic marginalization. And economic marginalization leads to all sorts of other things, like social marginalization, political marginalization. So this is some of the stark economic realities of the things that working mothers face. But it's not just about jobs and earnings, because there's so much more. There's so much about public policy in this country that is broken. So 25% of women in this country go back to work within 2 weeks of giving birth. So, because we have no paid family leave in this country, national paid family leave. So anyone who's given birth, or been near someone who's given birth, knows that there's no way to describe this other than completely cruel to both mother and baby. That there's no support in this country for saying that this is wrong. But it's not only wrong, it says a lot about where mothers fall in the hierarchy of American society. So, to give you further context, we have better laws in this country to protect dogs than we do to protect mothers. We put more legislative public policy priority on making sure newborn puppies are not separated from their mothers than we do for human mothers. So that just gives you a sense of how we value mothers in America. So these are just a few of the things that has got me interested, got me wondering about why things are the way they are. So this also has led me to think, economics, public policy, but also workplaces are a huge part of this equation. So basically, most workplaces are still set up for this guy. Most workplaces assume everyone is a dude with no caregiving responsibilities. He's not childless, but he might as well be. Like, we know he's not doing rushing home when a kid is sick from daycare. Okay. So and the way that this works is that many workplaces place a premium on who's at their desk the latest, not who's the most efficient. Wanting flexibility is seen as a lack of commitment rather than an effective tool to have a more diverse workplace. And don't get me started on the outrageous places that women are suggested that they pump breast milk in this country in offices, including dirty bathrooms and freight elevators that are used to take out trash. That's a new one I heard recently. So we need to rethink workplaces. It's not just these sort of issues that sort of float unconnected. We need to rethink workplaces. And I'm going to play a clip for you that has been really influential in my thinking about mothers in the workplace. And this is from Bridget Schulte, who's a journalist, and she's the director of the Better Life Lab.
Women have changed about as much as they can. And now it's time for the workplace to change, and it's time for men to change, and it's time for policy to change. Women can't change anymore. Women can't do anymore, forget about having it all. They're doing it all, and it's exhausting.
So what I wonder, yeah, Bridget, this clip stays in my mind all the time, okay. So what I wonder is, what if we lived in a world that truly embraced the idea that women can't change anymore? That women can't fit into this workplace and have caregiving responsibilities and continue to thrive. And that what if we lived in a world where everyone else had to change, not just mothers? And this is actually a very radical idea, because most media in America doesn't address this. I think there's so much richness and complexity to these topics, but as I was researching and reporting these things, I was noticing that most of the journalism about working motherhood was not in-depth and hard-hitting, talking about economics and public policy. It was usually a version of the same story about this lady, and it was usually tips and tricks about telling her how to change. and it was, what she needs to do it all. And, she's basically a beautiful blonde lady with her Mac laptop, multitasking, trying to do it all with the cute baby in her lap. But the reality is that there is no getting up at 5 a.m. or lunch packing strategies that's going to fix what's broken about motherhood in America. But anytime journalism or most stories I saw were all about how to make things work just a little bit better for her. How can I just give her that one tip that's going to make it all come together? And so I realized in my journalistic life, I wanted to tell much more in-depth stories and build community to tell stories that people hadn't heard before, not the same story about this lady over and over. And I wanted to tell stories about legal sex workers in Nevada, or a brand new take on the child care crisis, or what it's really like to run for office with little kids. And I wanted to break through these cliches and transform narratives to do real journalism and storytelling. And there was no one out there doing this, not in podcasts, and barely in written media either at the time. So all of this thinking went into developing the idea of what became the Double Shift podcast. And so I started pitching it to big podcast networks. And I didn't have a background in podcasts, but I had a very solid career in journalism, and I developed a lot of expertise in this subject through my written work. So I really felt like I was the right person to do this. No one was in the space. There were so many ideas and richness, and it's such an important topic that I felt like a podcast would be the perfect platform for it. So I started to do all this, and so I started to pitch it to big podcast networks. And this is some of the feedback that I got. So there's about 10,000 podcasts about sports. There's about 15,000 podcasts about technology. Big podcast executives told me that they didn't think there was enough material to do one podcast about working mothers. So 70% of mothers in America work. 82% of women become mothers, and there's 1 million millennial women who are becoming mothers every year. So to say that there's not enough interesting, rich stories to make a podcast about this shows how limited and stereotyping our imaginations are about working mothers, even in progressive environments. Because people believe there's truly nothing to us, that there's nothing there. So I probably pitched after this one about 10 podcast companies who all turned me down for various reasons. But that made me more determined to make the show, because basically I refused to accept living in a world where the double shift could not exist. And ultimately I got funded through foundations who saw the social change potential of this show. And so we are now primarily funded through grants, because doing real journalism is actually expensive. So I want to share a little bit with you from the podcast that I believe so passionately in and fought so hard to bring into the world. So the podcast debuted in February of this year, and our first season. And one of the reasons that we need funding to do real journalism about this is that we need more diverse stories and more creative thinking. And so this episode, our second episode, was a way I thought to talk about the child care crisis in a way that doesn't come from a middle class perspective. Because any parent knows that, every parent thinks about the cost of child care. And basically, most of the media about it is, wow, child care is expensive, that sucks. And then there's nothing more to it. There's no solutions or finding people who are doing different things. It's just sort of like, this is a problem that sucks for you, instead of thinking about what could change. So we went to a 24-hour daycare in Las Vegas that is running as a successful business, but that caters to mostly single mothers who go to school all day and work overnight. And that's why they take their kids to the 24-hour daycare. So those are voices I think we need when we discuss the child care crisis in America. And the clip I'm about to play for you is from actually one of the employees of this daycare, Peace Garden, talking about her own experiences as a kid. Because if we don't address these issues, they are passed down from the next generations. So I'm going to play this clip from you, Diana Moreno, who is an employee at Peace Garden.
When my parents moved here from California, my parents ended up becoming restroom attendants. And after school, my mom didn't have anywhere to leave me. She really didn't. So I was either under the sink, and that's where I would be until her shift was over. Because I understood, what my mom had to go through. And, until she was done with her shift about 2, 3 in the morning, then, go home and then boom, back to school. But it happens. Like I'm saying, maybe that's why I do work as hard as I do. And working at a daycare, I get to take care of kids and parents who don't have that option.
I think these are stories that we need to hear when we talk about childcare in America. Next, I want to share with you a clip from our third episode about Ashton Clemens, who, spoiler alert, is now House District Representative 57 from Greensboro, North Carolina. So during while she was running for office, I asked if I could follow along with her and sort of spend some time with her as she was, spend the afternoon with her as she's picking up her kids at school and going to campaign events, because 2018 was an exciting year in terms of more women and mothers running for office than ever before, unprecedented numbers. But I wanted to understand how this really was going to work, because if we want more women to run for office, we need to understand and support mothers in how they run for office. And until recently, mothers with young kids did not really run for office, and if they did, political consultants would tell them that they should downplay it with voters, because voters wouldn't believe that they could be a good politician and have little kids. So Ashton really put her motherhood front and center in her campaign, and I wanted to sort of learn about not just that photo op at the victory party where the kids are all dressed up and everything looks perfect. I wanted to understand the mechanisms of how this is really going to work, because I think that informs what political change could be coming in this country. So, and also being a mom influences her now as she's a lawmaker. She's really championing public pre-K and thinking a lot about the impact on families. So as we were doing our interview, the babysitter are picking up her 4-year-old twins from daycare, and we're sitting down in her living room doing our in-depth interview. And the babysitter comes in, and Ashton realizes that her oldest daughter, Letty, is not with the babysitter, and she's supposed to be with the babysitter. So the babysitter accidentally left the daughter at ballet and didn't know she was supposed to pick her up. And this is while our interview's going on. So of course I'm get the mic closer. Be sure we capture this moment, just get right in there. So after everything settled down, Letty was fine, the babysitter ran out to get her, blah, blah, blah. I asked Ashton about this sort of logistical snafu that I think every working mother can relate to this kind of moment.
The moment of all the logistics of the family that we just witnessed, that sort of reminded me of this idea that even when both parents are so involved, so often it's the mother who has the mental checklist about everything. You knew immediately as she walked in, where's Letty? She's supposed to be with you. You didn't miss a beat. What has been your experience with the mental checklist now that you're running for office?
I think it's just more. There's just more on the checklist, and it's less routine.
Do you feel like you can offload the checklist, or is the checklist always with you?
No. Can any woman offload the checklist? I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I wish I could. And I think it's a major difference in my husband and I. And I think he figures it out for sure. But it doesn't occupy this part of his brain in the way it does mine. And he doesn't own it in the same way. I'm the one sending the email, he's responding, then I'm getting the babysitters and doing all of those pieces. And it's not to say he doesn't do a whole lot, he does. It is different though, I think.
I heard a lot about this moment from people. People brought this moment up, and this question of the mental checklist, I think, is something that occupies so many women and mothers' minds. What was so interesting was after this episode came out, Ashton wrote me and she said that, of course, so my job as a journalist is to tell the story in the most complete and true way that I feel is possible. And so sometimes people like it, but that's not my job, is to make sure that they like the story. So, of course, every time we put out a story, I'm quietly nervous about what the subjects will think, but that's just, it is what it is. So she wrote me, and she said she loved the episode, but she was nervous about her mother hearing it because she was worried about her mother hearing about this incident of leaving the daughter at ballet. Because even though this woman is so incredible, has 3 kids, is running for office as a first-time candidate, just like this just unstoppable woman changing the world, she's still worried about her own mother judging her. And what was interesting to me, as we covered very diverse subjects in our first season, but the theme that came up over and over was every single woman that we profiled in our first season dealt with the issue of judgment. That was almost the thing that unified them all, is no matter what they were doing, what life choice they were making, doing anything in the world, they faced significant judgment. And I thought that was really very clarifying and telling about no matter what choices mothers make, we judge them. So, what's next for the double shift? We just finished season 1, and we're working on season 2, and I'm fundraising for season 3, so if there's any philanthropists in the audience out there who wants to support this work, we also have a fiscal sponsor. You can make nonprofit donations to us. Feel free to talk to me after. But I truly see this podcast as the first part of a powerful multi-platform conversation to fuel a social movement to challenge how society sees mothers and how we as mothers see ourselves. And my goal is not a goal that I will achieve this year. It will take many, many years to achieve. But my goal is equity for mothers in all aspects of society, in who runs companies and makes laws and runs the world. So in the beginning of this talk, I talked about feeling like a failure as a mother. And by doing this work, it has become very clear to me that every mother in America feels like a failure. But we are not failures. America is failing us, and it is a truly astonishing con job that society has pulled on us that has convinced us there's something wrong with us. The problem is not us. The problem is not us. And I would like to leave you with a few takeaways. So, my first takeaway for mothers is I hear a lot about mom guilt. Mom guilt is a way that we're very comfortable expressing ourselves in terms of guilt. That is a socially acceptable way to express our emotions. But I've done some research on guilt, and guilt actually operates in a part of the brain that's called a withdrawal motivation. It makes us quiet, it makes us want to hide, it makes us want to sort of be as small as possible. And I want to live in a world where we can get in touch with the realities of what mothers face, and I want to get angry about it. So anger is an approach motivation, meaning that people who are angry go towards challenges. They try to, they speak up, they stand up for themselves at work, they demand more from their partners at home, they go to protests, they try to change public policy, they sue their employers for discrimination. All those things, angry people can start a social movement. Angry people can start a revolution. Guilty people want to make sure nobody sees them. So I want mothers to get in touch with their feelings of anger and use that for positive social change. So my message for fathers. I have a few, but you guys can stick to one. This is truly the most impactful thing you can do to support mothers in our society. So whatever your company policy or your state policy or your what you can financially afford, you should take your full paternity leave. Companies are adding paternity leave as a benefit more and more and more, but often men don't always take it. They don't take what they're fully allowed because they are worried it will be seen negatively or it will hurt their careers. But actually studies show that paternity leave in offices is contagious. So when one man, especially who has any seniority and power, takes it, more men start to take it. And the effects are profound. So when men take full paternity leave, it reduces bias against mothers in the workplace, and it creates more empathy for mothers in the workplace. It transforms men's relationships with their own families. Men who take paternity leaves, partners it improves their mental health outcomes and reduces postpartum depression. And studies show that men who take a month or more of paternity leave are actually more involved with their child at age 6. This is an ability, this simple thing, there are very few things that are simple, but this actually has a profound impact on our society and culture and the experience for mothers in America. So my takeaway for everyone is that bias against mothers is rampant in our workplaces. There is a pernicious and often unconscious belief that mothers can't be good mothers and good workers at the same time. Many people believe this, and this hurts and holds back all women, whether they're mothers or not. And this shows up in paying mothers less. Mothers are paid less than women without children, denying them professional opportunities and advancement. Many studies show that this happens, and not considering us for jobs. Even though studies show mothers are more efficient than your average workers. If you want something done, I recommend giving it to a busy working mother. Just hot tip, okay. So this hurts all women, this hurts mothers, this hurts families, and this hurts communities. Anti-mom bias actually can come from all corners. It can come from women without children, men without children, men with children, and even other mothers. So even if you're a mother yourself, check your own biases in how you think about women in the workplace. So we can support women and be sure that we are not holding them back or hurting their careers and how we think about them because of our deeply societally ingrained views about mothers. So I hope that you enjoyed this talk. Please download and check out the Fellowship Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. You can find me in many places, all listed here. And if you believe in the feminist mission of this work, you can become a member of the Double Shift. It costs $5 a month and is really important in supporting the work that we're doing. And I'll keep wondering. Thank you. I'd love to take a few questions.
Why did you decide to leave New York and move down to Durham?
I wasn't expecting that one. So my husband and I decided we were ready for an easier and less expensive life. And we moved to Durham, and we got an easier and less expensive life. As promised. Also, my parents live in Chapel Hill, so we were familiar with the area. And since my mother-in-law has followed us here, so we now have a grandparent spread that is the envy of all of our friends. And actually, I think the move to Durham was pivotal in the creation of the Double Shift because I don't think I would have been able to work for as long and as hard on the show without like a clear amount of money coming in or financial payoff immediately if we kept living in New York. So I actually feel like moving to Durham was one of the really crucial steps in making the Double Shift happen.
I love your podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you. So as the parent of two now teenagers, I think there's a need for support for working moms with young children. That Anne Marie Slaughter wrote an article a couple years ago. There needs to be support for parents of teenagers because I could put a toddler in a room and they're not going to go out and have sex in my basement. I am terrified that people are vaping at my house right now. Chimney in my master basement. And I think there need to be policies for parents of that. I mean, I think there need to be policies for children of all ages.
Yes. Right. And yes. caregiving and caretaking is not, and that's the thing, like, your life doesn't, your caretaking responsibilities like don't end when your maternity leave is over. Like, this is a lifelong process, and that workplaces and society need to support us at all the different stages. And so it's not just about like how to get through the really tough, newborn or toddler years, but I think we need way more stories and creative thinking about all of the stages, and that's why I hope that I want there to be so much more storytelling and media about this. The double shift shouldn't be the only thing. Like, there needs to be so much more discussion and richness to this topic. So it's definitely not just about little kids. It's a lifelong conversation and ways to support people.
Hi, I really appreciate your talk. I'm finding myself missing a little bit of the nuance around kind of diversity of perspectives and demographics that mothers face. And you mentioned a little bit about class and how that factors in working mothers' experience, which seems like a very big difference.
Yes.
I'm also wondering about race and the disproportionate discrimination that mothers of color experience in the workplace and outside of the workplace. And I wonder if some of your research or some of your podcast really touches on those issues.
Yes, so I think we definitely are very interested in examining questions of class and race and all sorts of background and immigrant status, cultural background. All these things factor into these questions about judgment and these questions about how society views mothers. So it's interesting, the economic, mothers of color in different groups face different kinds of sort of double biases related to race and class. But there's also really interesting things, there's some interesting studies about how people view black mothers differently than white mothers because black mothers historically have worked outside the home more, and so there's different biases and judgments related to black mothers working or not working. So these are very complicated issues that we try to get to through storytelling often, and I think when I showed the slide of the pretty blonde lady, I really felt like so much of the media was really, so a way to get content, I'll give you a little secret about journalism, a way to get content that is not particularly expensive to make is to pay someone $200 to write a personal essay. So most of the people who write personal essays, especially about motherhood, are often white women who have relatively privileged positions, so they become the dominant narrative. They're the people who can afford to spend a lot of time to write this essay and have that inclination. So the purpose of the double shift is to not tell these obvious stories, but really to do reporting, to let other people who are outside of the sort of most dominant narratives speak for themselves. And we really do a lot to find those people, to highlight their voices, and to bring in these issues of race and class without sort of being like, allow me to give you a lesson on the history of intersectional feminism and overlapping identities, but let them speak for themselves and through the storytelling.
Thank you for the wonderful, speech and thoughts and everything. I'm in a career that's very male-dominated. I'm an architect, and one of the stunning bits of data in my field is that 60% of the people who go into college to study to become a professional architect are women, and 10 years in, 10% of the people left in the field are women.
Yeah.
10 years.
Yeah.
So, and that also, I think, reveals the nature of different types of career paths as well, in terms of how well they foster women in the workplace, working mothers in the workplace, and how difficult it can be to survive as a woman in particular career paths. And I don't know, I'm sure there are lots of other fields that experience that kind of bias, but I mean, it's an astonishing kind of fallout. And those women don't necessarily stop working, they stop working in architecture.
Right.
So anyways, I don't know if you can speak to some of that dynamic in...
Yeah, so this is true in a number of fields. Journalism has similar graduation rates, and then 30% of people who are in leadership positions are women in journalism. And so this really speaks to this idea that bias against mothers hurts everyone. So if you are a young woman starting out in your career, and whether or not you want to have kids, or whether or not you even know if you want to have kids, if there are not other women to look up to ahead of you, it's very hard to sort sort of continue to thrive in certain environments. And if you only have one type of person who are making decisions about workplace culture, deciding your benefits, deciding who's valuable, whose opinions are valuable, you're going to basically have very homogenous workplaces if you never sort of get diversity of thought into power and leadership. So this is a problem in a huge number of fields, and a lot of times it has to do with, the idea that we create these systems that basically goes back to the Don Draper thing. Like, the only valuable worker is the guy who can stay until all hours. And so many workplaces feel that way, that you end up, more and more people end up dropping out because they don't fit in that mold. And that doesn't just apply to women, it applies to people of color, it applies to people with different economic backgrounds or other kinds of caretaking responsibilities. Caring for aging parents is a huge issue in terms of, it's not just about children, it's about how to support people in all aspects of their career. So I really think this point goes back to the Don Draper idea that workplaces have to change it, or we're going to keep getting those numbers. And a lot of times people look at the numbers and are like, that's so weird. I wonder what could possibly, I guess women just hate architecture. Yeah, that must be it. Like, people don't really look at what's so clearly sitting right there.
Hi, thank you so much for coming today. And so, as a former journalist myself, who now owns an HR consulting firm, I've worked with a lot of companies that want to do better in this space. And it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of pushing, as you probably know.
Mm-hmm.
From your perspective, when has it been where you're like, okay, I see that they say they want to listen to me, but what has been that thing for you where you said, nope, it's not going to work here, I'm going to go out and do this on my own? What was that kind of determining factor for you?
Do you mean things I've observed in my reporting for women and mothers, or just in my own life?
In your own life, so as you were trying to push the, the working moms forward.
Yes.
To push that.
I mean, it wasn't a choice. No major network wanted to make this show. They did not believe in the show. They did not want to spend the money to make this show. They were much more interested in, doing another Daily News show or another sports show. So it wasn't like, basically the choice was like, do I give up on this idea, or do I just refuse to, go past their no, to say you are not the gatekeeper for what is an important story.
Yes.
And so as someone who spent most of my career feeling very validated by my fancy jobs in New York media, that was starting from scratch in podcasting in an industry that I had no known credibility or sort of history in. I think for me, I knew that this idea was important. And ultimately, I wasn't able to do it on my own. Completely on my own. I ultimately found champions, and the network that we're distributed by, which is Critical Frequency, is one of the only podcast networks owned and run by a working mother in the entire country. And she believed in this idea, and she's done a lot to help get this show out there. And I was also able to convince people who had grant money that this was a worthy idea. So it's not just that this is through sheer force of will. I had to get people on board in other ways, but I had to accept that this wasn't going to be about prestige. This wasn't going to be about how can I get this on the most prestigious podcast network, or how can I, make myself rich and famous through this podcast. That has not happened yet. So I had to sort of let go of that and really be motivated by the social, what I saw as the social power of the show, and let that be the guiding force rather than, if I can't get a lucrative podcast deal, then it's not worth doing.
And so far, my second part to that is, in your experience kind of doing this moving forward, have you found companies that have come to you since and said, yes, we believe in this, but they actually walk the walk instead of just talking the talk?
It's interesting. No company has come and tried to make me a sweet offer to buy the double shift. But it's interesting because I thought people are like, oh, would you want to try to get it on a big network? And the thing is that, so I own the double shift. I own all the rights to the double shift, and I answer to no one. And I already did the hardest part, which is to prove that this is worthy and that this is important and that people want to listen to it. So if someone wants to, like, I'm not interested in a company coming to try to buy up the double shift to tell me what to do. Like, I'm basically now done with anyone telling me what to do. So, and I feel like I've earned it. So that's like, if the goal is not like, let me make a great first season so a fancy podcast company can come buy my intellectual property. Like, that's not the game I'm in, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So,